Hi, I'm Rich Sains, and you're listening to the Procurement Conversations Big Conversation. Join me as I talk to procurement leaders and industry specialists about the biggest issues facing our profession. Welcome to the Procurement Conversation. This week we're talking to Pauline Potter, who is Director of Procurement and Sustainability at Evri. Pauline, welcome.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate having me on.
As an intro, tell us a little bit about yourself and about Evri.
Pauline Potter, the immediate accent giveaway, as I did grow up in the United States, but I've been in the UK about 10 years now. Engineer by training, but have spent my whole career in sort of operations, supply chain, and procurement. I'm currently the Director of Procurement Sustainability here at Evri. Our UK listeners, I assume most people will know us one way or the other. We're the UK's largest dedicated parcel delivery service, deliver north of 700 million parcels a year. Our mission as a business is to be the most convenient way to deliver parcels without costing the earth. So from start to finish, we're a good mixture of cost-focused, service-focused, sustainability-focused, which is something I really like about my role.
We talk about procurement's strategic role, but I think it's fair to say that many teams aren't operating at this level, or they think they are, but they're still largely an admin function. How would you describe a truly strategic procurement function?
I think procurement is an absolutely fantastic profession. I guess I'm sure your listeners, by nature of listening to the conversation, already believe that, but I think that's worth reinforcing. What I think true great strategic procurement should be is where you're identifying and delivering the best value for money in a way that's managing risk and managing sustainability ambition. And I think that should always be your anchor point. Like I use that as a bit of a one-liner in my business and in my team is what you're doing right now contributing to one of those three things and in a really effective use of your time to deliver those three things. So I think there's a little bit of, I've noticed, I don't know if that's come up much, but it's almost a dirty word around prioritizing savings in procurement these days. I think that's hugely valuable. It's the core of our function. Let's not get away from that. It's still very strategic to deliver unit price reduction. That's not a problem. That's not mutually exclusive. But even better if you understand what the situation calls for. So sometimes that is a unit price reduction and it's really tactical and you spend a couple weeks on it and you're done. Sometimes it's let's take a pause. Let's completely rethink what the good or service we're buying is and what do our stakeholders need and what does the business need and approaching it from a top down rather than bottom up, if that makes sense. We run obviously an enormous fleet. We're a parcel delivery business. So fleet is our bread and butter. We were looking at fuel spend. That's one of our top categories of spend. There's margins in there for fuel distributors. They're tiny, right? They're percentages or less than 1%. Still important that you negotiate the unit rate on top of that, right? Still important. Let's make sure we're getting value for money, good payment terms, that kind of thing. Even better if what we did this year is look at how do we just challenge how much fuel we're using, meaning how efficiently we're driving and how well do we understand that? And worked with our planning function, our driver training function, our fleet function, did a whole program and trial around implementing telematics for our van fleet that now is much better user experience for the drivers and for our central teams and things like that. We're seeing sort of 10, 12, 15% reductions in fuel use versus the, at best, percentage on a 1 or 2% margin on the fuel spend, if that makes sense. So both are important, but given any particular category and what your stakeholders need, how do you focus on the right one to be that kind of strategic partner?
Yeah, I guess it's about challenging where is the value and where is the value of your time spent. As you say, there's obviously a big cost there that's most of it's non-influenceable in a traditional sense. You have a little margin that you can maybe play with a little bit, but then there's a wider piece about those behaviors and how you can actually drive more value. And as well, it's I suppose that this savings piece, it does vary by industry, by business type, because I'd imagine your business is a high volume and obviously every percentage point is an improvement on your overall net profit at the end of the year.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important to be seen as strategic and to feel that you are strategic is being capable of doing that, right? So making sure that you as a function, as individuals, as a business, when those interesting opportunities arise, you're ready and able to deliver on them. But also the relationships you've built in the business where people want to come to you. I do have, in a really nice way, members of my executive team saying, can Pauline and the procurement team take a look at this area? We're spending a lot. Can we do something different? Like that, those are the days that might be a bit of a nightmare to go pursue, but those are the days that I feel great about. Clearly our function is seen as value adding because they're looking for some creativity in a new solution, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And how would you say that these other more tactical teams could get to the right level?
I guess two main things that I'd be thinking of, and again, I try to do day to day with the team still as well, is one is there's never a wrong time to pause and think about how are you spending your time, because the way you spent your time a week ago, a month ago, a year ago may not be the right way you're doing it now. So every single time you're doing that, don't just go on to autopilot. If you're running an RFP just for the sake of running an RFP, are you going to spend 6 months having not learned much and not negotiated much? Or is that going to be really high impact by putting competitive tension in? So I think that is make sure that you're not just blindly following the process steps, like where process and rigorous full end to end all the way through a particular element is really necessary and it's going to be really valuable. Definitely pursue it. Where realistically, it's not going to have a huge amount of impact, but may be very time consuming. Are there any reports that you're doing that no one is reading? Is there an element of what you're spending your time doing that is impactful for people? The second is just a constant belief in continuous improvement, right? I use the phrase, we try to quiet the noise. Are there things that we're doing that are just noisy that end up being really time consuming? But you have to do them because otherwise the business would stop. We've had a variety of headaches in our utilities area over the last couple of years. Our supplier has presented some challenges. Our internal processes have presented some challenges. And my utilities buyer is absolutely fantastic, but has to spend lots of time doing the quote unquote firefighting work. And it's all a balance of how do we make sure, yes, we're doing it, but every time one of those things happens, what went wrong? What can we do? Is there a process, a template, a data element, an analysis, some automation, hefty conversation with the supplier? What needs to happen so we're not doing this again in 3, 6, 9 months' time? So I'd say those are the main two, is just make sure that you are deliberately assessing how you spend your time to make sure that it is on the impactful bits, whatever that means for your business. And two is making sure that you are really pushing. Just because it's a firefighting day today doesn't mean that it needs to be tomorrow.
Yeah, I really agree with that second point, that you do see that a lot. And in procurement, we just don't have time to be doing anything regularly that we don't need to be doing. And we should always be learning from the past and making those changes so that we can get to the right place in the future.
Yeah.
So what would you say is different about your team to others you've worked with or alongside?
I would say a big thing that we do, I really shove down everybody's throats, is this belief in continuous improvement mindset. So our role in procurement, again, it's different in every business, but it can be quite thankless because you're not necessarily the decision maker. You're not necessarily the one with the full front of glamour of when things go well. And often you might be the people that are gone to when things go wrong. But I'm a big believer, my boss uses this phrase that I talk about shamelessly, is he calls procurement the aggregators. So we're the people in the business that kind of can help coordinate, again, loads of different stakeholder groups, both internally and externally, and making sure that we're doing that in a really positive, continuous improvement way. They use this phrase called improvement mindsets, which is things like making sure you're not waiting on others, you're taking the initiative, you're making fact-based decisions, you're not jumping to conclusions. It's a series of kind of behaviors that first and foremost, that's what I want our team to evidence. And then all the other hard skills are much, much easier to repeat, right? It's the attitude and the influence and the way that your stakeholders see and trust you that is actually going to be the big kind of change management lever that makes the biggest difference from my perspective.
You've mentioned a couple there, but what would you say are the skills and behaviors that are required for this new way of working?
I guess first and foremost, I think is the belief that you want to do more, better, and you want to be supporting your business stakeholders. So I'm a big believer. I think that procurement is a service function. Like, it's not about us. And if you're a really egocentric person, I think you might struggle in a variety of procurement roles. But equally, being a support function doesn't mean you're deferential, right? Like, you should have really healthy, balanced relationships with your stakeholders. And I think that's the key thing, is if you're someone that you can build up trust and credibility and consistently deliver results for people that are better for them. So not just reduce costs, better service, things like that. So first is just attitude, genuine attitude, and your ability to resiliently come back to that positive attitude to support. I think analytics you can't get away from. I think that one of the great things about procurement is it's this lovely intersection between analytical skills and interpersonal skills. And gone are the days where sort of pounding fists on tables to get a lower price is the right response for most things. You're infinitely better off in most instances going through do the analytical work, tell me the full total cost breakdown, tell me the unbundled elements, tell me why that matters for their supply chain, tell me what has the market done that actually influences that. And with the facts to hand, that makes your negotiation, the first 80% of it, much, much easier. So that's probably my two. I think attitude and analytics are the biggest.
Great. And how do you go about finding the right people?
Great question. A variety of different things. I don't think that there's one size fits all. We introduced a procurement graduate program in 2022 that has been just wildly successful. So we have done that, which has two parts. So the first is they spend over 2 years for 6-month rotations in different categories around our team. So great exposure for them to work with different people, work with different stakeholders, work on completely different buying. What was the one we were talking about the other day? Security services or loo cleaning is very different to going and negotiating on fleet is very different to supporting our AWS contract renewal. And then that's married with, through the apprenticeship program, the SIPS Level 4 accreditation. So they're getting both that sort of theory basis in addition to their on-the-job learning, which I think is really important. I think that sort of talent pipeline is hugely essential. Again, I think it's interesting to see I'm getting more and more applicants who have some version of procurement exposure in university. Yeah. Which I don't know about you. I didn't know the word procurement existed in university. So that's quite cool. And then for the rest of the talent pool, again, I mostly look for attitude. I'm not nearly as concerned around kind of background. I'm certainly not worried about the categories. We have the benefit for us that everything we buy is most businesses' version of indirects. So from fleet to fuel to services to professional, that kind of thing. So as long as you have a basic procurement grounding, you'll be able to learn the specifics. And again, attitude, our businesses moves at the absolute rate of knots, which is not for everybody, and that's okay. It's something we're really clear about in interviews. Is you need to do a little bit like chaos because we drive huge impact by doing things really well, really quickly, and really collaboratively. We work with a really great group of people here. It's one of my favorite parts about the business. But if you're someone who wants to work on one thing at a time, one RFP per year, like this will never be your happy place.
Yeah, totally. I think, and that collaboration piece, that really helps drive pace, doesn't it? Absolutely. Bringing all the people that you need to bring to the right place at the right time to make those decisions quickly. Yeah, that is like a super skill, especially in that sort of fast moving, high ambiguity type environment. Yeah, and it's great fun as well, isn't it? When you've got a lot of people who are ideally all on the same page wanting to drive something forward. That's brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something, I guess, that our business does quite well. And I think all businesses can do. But we always talk about what are those sort of things that we're all pulling in the same direction. Again, we want to maintain our position as a low-cost carrier. We don't want to do that at the expense of anything else. So whenever my head of transport or head of fleet or head of engineering or anyone else, they want to do these things, the immediate conversation is, how do we get best value for money? How do we de-risk? How does this link to our sort of overall sustainability agenda? And then we're all having that same conversation. And I think that's partly set at the top, but that's also because all of us at my level and the level below me and the level below that, we're all using that same language consistently. And that didn't happen overnight. When I started working with the business back in 2020, that was not necessarily the case uniformly across the business.
And I think that North Star, the strategic mission of the business, is really important to get people pulling in the same direction, isn't it? Because you do, in other organizations, you'll see some people, especially if they've been there a long time, they'll be obsessed with gold plating every single requirement. They want everything to be like perfect. And then you've got other people coming in who want things to be low cost and maybe a little bit too cheap. And you're having a lot of dispute in those sort of requirements gathering processes before you're actually even getting into the being able to brief the suppliers on something. So yeah, I think having clear strategy around that's really helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you find that there's people outside of business that, because you mentioned the graduates there that are coming in, obviously clear mindset, hiring on attitude, the rest of it, do you find people outside, maybe from other departments or other industries that are coming in, or is it that people in that sort of supply chain industry are best suited to your organization?
I think it's a real mixture. I think other departments, certainly, we've got some really interesting internal programs around like operations, continuous improvement. We've had them as members of the team in the past, because again, it's all about understanding your baselines then. I think the key is industry seems to be most relevant. Again, I'm not someone who thinks that if you've not worked in logistics procurement, you can't work here. But there seems to be a bit of a correlation between retail, FMCG, logistics, we all have similar types of pay. So it's a good indicator. It's not the only thing, but it's a good indicator that you're comfortable with those ways of working. Whereas if all you've ever done is a particular element of public sector and there was a very specific way of doing things, that may not necessarily be replicated here. So that'll be much more down to the person, and do they like that? Do they hate that? How do they want to adjust that?
And what do you find is the impact of doing things differently?
Job satisfaction for sure, definitely for me, and I believe for the team, because we get good recognition. I think that the proverbial seat at the table for procurement is built, not handed to you. And we are just in lots of really interesting conversations. We're in the benefit of, as the business grows or changes, or actually we're thinking about changing the way we do this particular strategy. Usually we're in those conversations early on, if not from day one. We know we're going to need to engage procurement. Let's do a little bit of briefing now, which I think that certainly in previous businesses that I'd worked with or had seen through my consulting experience, one of the biggest challenges with job satisfaction is feeling like you don't understand what role you're playing in the wider part of the organization. And I think that is very clear for us as a team, which is quite good. And you're just able to deliver some really high impact results as well. Getting big numbers on the board, again, I think is a great motivator for procurement. I'm happy every single time we see the savings landing into the P&L. And you're able to do that because you're able to scope and land change that actually hits. It's not a recommendation that goes nowhere that might be good. It's, no, this was our plan. We executed it really well with our stakeholder base. This is how that's translating into the cost and revenue line for the business.
When you're hiring, do you see more female candidates coming forward now?
I think in general now versus 3-4 years ago, we are seeing more, but it is still very much split. I think the more junior the role, the more frequently we seem to, as a wildly broad brush, we tend to see more female candidates coming through. And we put a lot of effort into making sure that, again, we're not looking for industry specific. We're not looking for category specific. Like, we're trying to eliminate lots and lots of things that might potentially predispose any sort of gender bias or just historical industry bias that you might have. So it is definitely moving in the right direction, but yeah, certainly more slowly than I think anyone would want.
And so why would you say that the gender balance in procurement leadership is still off kilter? And how do you think we could go about changing that?
I think partly it's change. Change takes time as people come up through the senior ranks. So if your pipeline from 15, 20 years ago was predominantly male, naturally the way the percentages filter up. Also historically and particularly pre-COVID, again, painting with a wildly broad brush as everyone's situation is different. I think return to the workplace, a lot of the kind of home and family burden did sit with women. You didn't have men who could work from home and support with childcare throughout the day or things like that. So I do think that's one of the sort of positive knock-on impacts of us transitioning to more flexible working, which has been really good. So partly there's a time element, and hopefully we will see the kind of fruitions of that over the next decade. Partly, I just think it's having advocates. I've talked with a couple of people around what are the biggest contributors to getting into senior roles or your professional success. I'd like to believe I've got plenty of good kind of raw material content. I have worked my socks off my entire career, but equally at every role I've ever had, I've had just fantastic advocates, both male and female, in more senior positions than me. And it's a step beyond, if something was easy, they'll put Pauline in that role. They've actively sought out opportunities for me. Now, I also vocalized I wanted opportunities. Again, there's ownership to put yourself in that place. But I'm just hugely thankful that I have literally had people in every single one of those roles who've said, you know what, I know this is important to Pauline. I'm going to go find, create, develop an opportunity for that. And I think that's really important to recognize, again, male or female. Are you doing that for the people in your team at every single level? Because that is how you're going to get people into senior roles, right? And making sure that you're identifying and creating those opportunities for women in your organization at every level, if that makes sense.
And now you've taken over sustainability. Do you think that sits naturally within procurement, or do you think that should maybe be its own function, or just something that the business does?
I think it varies wildly by organization. I think the things that made it make sense for us, at least at this moment in time, and then you never know for future, is we, by nature of what we do, we only have upstream scope 3 emissions. So we're not manufacturing anything. So there's nothing downstream. No. So everything related to our carbon footprint is upstream, aka our supply base. So there's nothing around kind of consumer impact and things like that. I've been at previous conferences, and sometimes people forget about downstream Scope 3, and they think Scope 3 is a procurement problem. There's two very different types of Scope 3, one of which might be procurement's problem. So that works well for us. The second is the fact that our carbon is our sort of headline sustainability metric. Now, we have lots of objectives across E, S, and G, so environmental, social, and governance, all of which are varying levels of influence by our supplier base, but particularly our carbon footprint. Almost everything in there is directly related to something we buy. So whether that is, again, like the fuel that we use in the fleet choices we make, or the electricity that we purchase, or the way we're engaging our stakeholders around the suppliers that we're using, or the outsourced transport and distribution where we've subcontracted logistics, all of those in some way are about a supplier that we're working with and behavior we need changed from them, or decisions we make about what we're buying from them. So I think because of that, it makes a lot of sense for us, particularly at where we are in the journey right now. I think something that's really important to acknowledge is I very much see myself, and I help set and amend the strategy that we have, but I'm building on a really fantastic strategy foundation that was created by my predecessor. And I've been in heavy execution mode, as you will, for this next sort of 4 or 5 years. I think setting out the tone for what matters most, what's most material to our organization, what are the things we're really going to double down on, what are the things that actually, it's not that they're not important, but they're probably not the priority right now. I think that's probably quite useful to do as an independent function, and making sure that you're laying out the full set across the business. And then now that we're in deep execution mode of, all right, we know what needs doing, it just has to go get done. Procurement is excellent at that as a function, right? We're making sure that the strategy itself gets translated into full implementation.
Great, yeah, and reporting back those metrics and measurements and showing the progress that's being made. Yeah, that's something we do very well, isn't it?
Yeah.
So in a fast-moving business, how do you balance important versus urgent, or process versus progress? I think you've spoken a little bit about how it's important just to get stuff done. How do you go about doing that?
And I wouldn't say we do it perfectly every time. Probably worth acknowledging. Yeah, you in any role, and especially in procurement, you should be thinking about what is your contribution to this particular situation. And that should be really clear. And that's different for different stakeholders. Some are really technical and know everything about the product or service inside and out. That means you probably don't need to be in as much of that detail. You need to understand what's the implication commercially of that detail. For some, they might just be tossing over the fence, I need X, and you probably do need to go get into the detail of what does that mean for specific. So first is, just understanding what's the role you're playing versus the role your stakeholders are playing. And I think it's important to acknowledge that might not start from a place of perfect alignment. They think their role should be X and your role should be Y. There should, again, be some healthy tension in there to say, no, I think my role should be this, and I need more or potentially less from you. I think understanding, the impact of your involvement is really important. Don't do process for process sake, and making sure that there's a big valley between doing like a perfect, super rigorous process and doing nothing. Like, you always want to make sure you're doing a level of supplier due diligence, no matter what. You always want to make sure that the contract you're putting in place and whatever guise it is protecting you from risk. You always want to, there's some foundations that no matter what, you should always be involved in. But whether that is a tactical negotiation or 3 quotes or a full RFP process or a bit of a dip in and out or some innovation sessions, I just think there should be a conscious choice every single time you're going into that to say, what's the right approach for here? We're working on a really interesting project right now that is very much around like one of our delivery methods, and do we want to have a bit of a rethink on a make versus buy over the next couple of years? Now, question 1 is, does that business case stack up at all, order of magnitude? So step 1 for the team is, let's not do a full-blown 1-year RFP, which absolutely will be necessary if we pursue that strategy. But we haven't said, yes, that strategy is definitely right yet. So we're going to do a very short and sharp order of magnitude RFI the next 4 weeks. High level, are we talking, again, 100 grand, 1 million, 10 million type of numbers?
Yeah.
If then we have executive level buy-in and a whole set of the stakeholders that say, yes, this is the right thing we want to pursue, then great, we'll all dump the time into it. But the worst thing in the world is when, which I'm sure people can relate to, you've spent 6 months of your life trying to do this like perfect assessment or RFP or even like supplier relationship management activity, and nobody wants it at the end, or there's no budget for it at the end. Yeah. Making sure you've got those really clear stage gates up at the beginning is super important, so that then you can tailor your approach and the way you're spending your time on it.
I think, yeah, that's a really great point, because quite often we fall into this trap. Someone will say, let's do an RFP about this thing, and there's no questions asked. It's just like going to dive straight into it. And actually, it might not be the right approach. I think asking those questions up front, and as you say, maybe doing a little bit of scoping, a little bit of thinking, saying, look, this is our thesis, and then how can we prove or disprove that? I think we could do a lot more about that. I've seen a lot of you even work on pieces of work and get to the end of it, and then there's no budget for it. And it's like that's like a criminal waste of time. As we said earlier, there's not enough time in procurement. So why are we wasting it on all this stuff?
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's it.
I also reinforce urgent does not mean the same thing for everyone. So my top 2 calibrations: is it going to stop the business? Is this something that's truly going to impact our operations? Because if so, whatever you're doing, drop it and go do this. It doesn't matter. Go do this. If it's something on the exec agenda that is genuinely urgent, that's a good second calibration, but even that needs a bit of assessment. And then beyond that, it's like again, making sure that you're always asking that second level of questions. They're saying do X, then you want to say, can you show me the data for that? Can we review this together? What's the actual process look like? You don't need to go to the nth degree, but one level down saying, like, why is it urgent? Is that because there's a contract risk? Is that because something's going to fall over next month? Is that something that's genuinely time dependent? Or is it just it's convenient for you right now? Those are very different types of urgency.
Or you've left it to the last minute and it's going to be embarrassing if you don't do something about it.
And all of those are fine. Again, we need to be flexible as a function. We're here to support. We're here to support the business and make sure that we are the most collectively successful. But equally, I want them to understand that if this is something we're dropping other things to support, that just can't be the pattern, right? That's not the end of the world, but it can't be the pattern, because that's not going to get us all the right results.
No. You do see that sometimes, especially when there's like a lot of governance around certain processes. You will see people almost leave it to the last minute to try and bypass some of that, especially if it's something that's really important, because in the long run it saves them time. But yeah, you're right. You can't let that be the people see that there's a benefit of bypassing the process like that.
And I think that's another thing that we try and work on, which again is by nowhere near perfect by any stretch. But you proactively identify things that might be urgent later, which again, it takes some discipline to do. And that really does need to start with your leadership and your procurement leadership top down. But you're like, all right, I know there's going to be a particular structural decision happening in our network in 2 years' time. I know to do that properly, that's going to take a year. I know to do that scoping for that year of activity, that's going to take at least 3, 4, 5 months. So if that's less than 18 months away, even if I've not been approached, who do I go talk to about that? I'm not a believer in saying a year from now, I can sit there and complain being like, oh my God, they didn't talk to me. Like, that's at least 50% on me. If I knew that was coming down the track, I need to make sure I'm proactively going to my stakeholders and saying, let's build a joint timeline. Tell me what you will need from my team in 6 months' time, so I'm prepping their workload accordingly, just so we can calm those things down. Again, not blaming others, taking the accountability for, and sometimes it is just to chuck over the fence last minute. But the more you can mitigate yourself, it's also useful for them, right? Because your stakeholders are probably just thinking, I need to deliver this. Understandably, they're not thinking, oh, I need to make sure procurement are teed up on this exact date, right?
Well, exactly. Yeah, they've got so many other things going on. Yeah, I think that's where that sort of experience comes from when you work. You've got an experience in the category, you understand what those things are that come and you at the last minute and how you can get ahead of those. So yeah, that's... And what does your CEO think about procurement?
Usually supportive from day one, I've got to say. It's been great to see also how his sort of level of support and challenge for procurement has changed over the years as our function has changed. Procurement at Evri was only centralized in 2018. It's pretty new for considering the size of business we are. He is really good he wants to understand like the full breadth of opportunity before we constrain ourselves around, we don't have people or time or money or support or whatever, which I think is really the right mindset to go out with procurement so you can focus on the top value. So every year we do full category planning across the team. That is done in give or take December ahead of budget season. And ahead of that, we present basically to our CEO, CFO, CIO, and say, here's the procurement things on the pad. Some of them procurement can do on their own, and we flag those. So these are things that just FYI, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go renegotiate this. I'm going to go change the way we're doing this with the supplier. Doesn't impact you per se, but I need you to know. Some of it is we'll need some involvement from the business. So I'm going to need input into a spec change, or I'm thinking about changing suppliers, but they're fully they'll need you involved in the process. Not huge. And then some of them are, actually quite challenging. We'd need lots of different departments, lots of stakeholder groups lined up, driving this, owning this. And we present that back to him. And it's what's your menu of what you'd like us to work on this year? If understandably operations have loads of other priorities, that's great. If you believe they're working on the right things, I probably can't assume that all my projects in that third column are going to get the right time and bandwidth from them. So maybe this isn't the year to do them. So I'm going to focus more on those left-hand. Actually, if we're thinking business is running phenomenally, everything's nice and smooth, we're looking for those next big step change things that we could do differently. Great. Who are the people that's going to help us with that and build it into budgets from day one? And I think that's a really good tone that obviously we worked through that over the last 4 years of our ways of working together. But our CEO and my boss, our CFO, have done a really good job at setting that tone of tell me everything, and then we'll make decisions collectively as a leadership team around how we focus. Don't constrain thinking we don't have the time or this won't work or we've always done X. Like start with the full opportunity, whittle ourselves down and set stretching but achievable goals therefore.
Are you hiring right now?
Yes, I am. I actually have two fantastic roles in our sort of procurement, IT procurement subsets for a senior buyer and a vendor manager. If anyone's interested, we're an absolutely crazy and absolutely fantastic place to work.
And how should people reach you?
Either on LinkedIn or all of our job postings are up on Indeed as well.
Brilliant. Well, Pauline, thanks for joining us today.
Great. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for listening. Do like and share and subscribe to hear the next procurement conversation.